You'll sign the cabin over to the association by Friday, or we'll take it. Consider this your courtesy notice." That was the last line of an email sent to me on a Tuesday morning in March by Diane Coyle, president of the Aspenwood Ridge Homeowners Association for 9 years running. The cabin she wanted was mine. It sat on 11 acres of pine and granite above a creek my grandfather fished, 2 miles up the mountain from the gated subdivision Diane ran like a small country she had crowned herself queen of. She had decided my land was hers to absorb. She had decided this without reading a single page of the deed. What she did not know, what she never once bothered to check in the 18 months she spent trying to pry me off that mountain, was that I owned the building her association rented its offices in. Not figuratively. On paper, recorded at the county, signed and notarized. The little strip mall down on Route 9 where the Aspenwood Ridge HOA kept its front desk, its filing cabinets, and its laminated parking placards belonged to me. Through a holding company my late wife and I built one quiet winter 20 years back. Diane had been mailing her rent check to a property manager every month without ever once asking whose name sat behind the company. My name. The same man she was trying to evict from his own grandfather's cabin. So when her email said, "Take the cabin," my reply said something else. If you had been sitting at my kitchen table that morning, coffee going cold, reading that line for the 3rd time, what would you have written back? My name is Walt Brennan. I am 62 years old. For 31 years I was a commercial title examiner, which means I spent my working life reading deeds, chains of ownership, easements, liens, and the small print that decides who actually owns a thing when 2 people both claim they do. I retired 4 years ago to the cabin my grandfather built in 1951, up above the town of Cedar Hollow in the mountains where I learned to fish before I learned to drive. My wife Marie passed 2 years before I retired. She and I had bought and sold and held property together for most of our marriage. Quietly, carefully, the way 2 people do when one of them reads contracts for a living, and the other has a memory like a steel trap. The holding company was hers as much as mine. Her signature is on the original articles. I keep that page in a folder. I keep a lot of things in folders. That habit is the whole story. So I will tell you about it now, and you will understand the rest. When you examine title for a living, you learn fast that the truth of a property is not what people say at the closing table. It is what is recorded. The recorded instrument, dated and stamped and filed, beats every loud voice in the room. I learned that lesson the hard way on my 3rd closing as a young man, when a seller swore on his mother's grave that a strip of riverfront went with the house, and the buyer believed him, and the deed said otherwise, and the deed won. I watched a grown man lose $40,000 to a sentence somebody had recorded 30 years before he was born. I never forgot the look on his face. I learned to trust paper over performance before I was 30, and I never unlearned it. So when I moved up to the cabin full-time, I did what I had always done. I pulled my own chain of title all the way back to the original patent. I had the boundaries surveyed fresh, every corner pin found and flagged. I confirmed the access easement across the lower parcel, read the language twice, and confirmed it ran to my land and no other. I put every page in a labeled manila folder in a fireproof box in the back room. The box Marie bought me the year I retired because she said I would lose my mind without something to organize. I kept a yellow legal pad on the kitchen counter where I wrote down anything that happened on the property worth writing down. Date, time, what occurred, who was there. An after-action habit, my neighbor Sam called it. Sam Ruiz ran the feed store in Cedar Hollow for 40 years and knew everybody who had ever bought a bag of grain in that valley. He was a wide, slow-moving man with a laugh you could hear across the parking lot. And he had a way of leaning on my truck bed and watching me write in that legal pad like I was performing a magic trick he could not quite figure out. He thought my note-taking was funny. He would say, "Walt, you fixing to sue the weather." He stopped thinking it was funny eventually. There came a day he asked me for a blank pad of his own, and I gave him two. Diane Coyle entered my life on a Thursday in the fall of my first full year up there. I was at my gate, a simple iron pipe gate my grandfather hung in 1958, oiling the hinge bolt because it had started to complain in the cold, when a white luxury SUV with a vanity plate that read RIDGE1 came up the access road and stopped a little too close to my truck. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a woman in a magenta blazer, white slacks and kitten heels that were already losing the war with my gravel. She had a clipboard pressed to her chest like a shield. She had pearl earrings. She had pushed her sunglasses up onto the crown of her sharp blonde bob. And she looked at my cabin, at my grandfather's woodshed, at the split rail fence I had rebuilt by hand, the way a developer looks at an empty lot. She did not see a home. She saw a problem on a checklist. "This structure is in violation of Aspenwood Ridge community standards," she said. She did not say hello. She did not ask my name. The roofline, the unpermitted outbuildings, the color of that fencing. "You're functionally part of our jurisdiction up here, and we'll need a compliance walkthrough scheduled this week. I'll have my office send the paperwork." I set the oil can down on the gatepost and wiped my hands on a rag, slow, the way you do when you want a second to pick your words. I told her, level and plain, that my cabin was not in her association, that my parcel predated the subdivision by half a century, that she was welcome to check the county records, which would show my land was never platted into Aspenwood Ridge and never would be. She smiled the way people smile when they have already decided you are wrong and find your wrongness a little tiresome. "Everyone up this road benefits from the association," she said. "The roads, the property values, the standards. That makes you part of it, whether the paperwork's caught up or not. I'll be in touch, Mr. Brennan." She knew my name after all. She got back in the SUV, backed it in a tight, angry arc that threw gravel against my fence, and drove down the mountain. That night, I wrote it on the legal pad. Thursday, 4:10 in the afternoon. Diane Coyle, HOA president, demanded a compliance walkthrough of a parcel outside her jurisdiction. First contact. I dated it. I filed it. I did not know yet that I had just started a binder that would take 18 months to fill and one afternoon to spend. Here's the thing about a woman like Diane. She was not stupid. She was incurious, which is more dangerous. She believed that her 9 years of presidency, her gavel at the monthly meetings, her authority over paint colors and mailbox heights in a subdivision of 90 homes, extended outward like a force field over every acre she could see from the Ridge Road. And she had a reason to believe it that I would not understand for months. Her husband, Greg Coyle, ran a development outfit called Summit Line Builders. Summit Line had quietly optioned the 3 undeveloped parcels at the top of the mountain, planning a luxury enclave they were calling the Reserve. There was only one problem with the Reserve. The only legal road to those parcels ran across the access easement on my land, my grandfather's road. Without my easement, their development was 11 acres of granite they could not reach. Diane did not want my cabin because she hated my fence. She wanted my road. I am getting ahead of the staircase, though, and the staircase is the part you came for. Let me climb it the way it happened, year by year, count by count. The first formal escalation came that winter. A letter on Aspenwood Ridge letterhead, certified mail, informing me that I had been assessed a fine of $200 for failure to schedule a compliance inspection. I had never agreed to an inspection. I had no obligation to one. I photographed the letter, logged it, and filed it. Fine number 1, $200 assessed against a man who did not owe the association a penny. I did not pay it. I did not call her to argue. I wrote it down. By spring, the fines had multiplied, like the weeds along my fence line. A notice for my fence color, which had been that same weathered cedar since before Diane owned a pair of kitten heels. A notice for my grandfather's woodshed, which her letter called an unpermitted structure, as if a building that had stood for 66 years needed her permission to keep standing. A notice for parking my truck on my own gravel, in my own drive, behind my own gate. Each one a flat dollar figure, each one certified, each one signed by Diane Coyle, President. I would walk down to the mailbox at the bottom of the road, find the green certified slip, sign for the letter, bring it back up to the kitchen, photograph it flat on the table next to a ruler so the date stamp was legible, log it on the pad, and slide it into the folder behind the right tab. It became a kind of ritual. By the end of that spring, the binder held 6 notices totaling $1,100 in fines I would never pay, and she could never collect, because she had no lien rights, no jurisdiction, and no recorded interest in my land. 6 notices, $1,100, 0 authority. Sam Ruiz told me to lawyer up. We were standing in the feed store, the smell of grain and oiled leather thick around us, and he set a 50-pound sack on the counter harder than he needed to. Walt, this woman is not going to stop. People like her don't stop, they just find a bigger hammer. I told him I was a title man, and the title was clean. And a clean title is a wall you do not have to defend. You just have to be standing behind it when they finally throw themselves at it. He shook his head and bought me a coffee from the pot he kept by the register, the burned kind, and we did not agree, but we did not need to. My daughter told me the same thing, more sharply. That is the other person you need to know about. My daughter, Hannah, was 17 that first year, a junior at Cedar Hollow High, living with me at the cabin since her mother died. Hannah had Marie's dark hair and her mother's habit of going very still when she was angry instead of loud. She was sharp in a way that worried her teachers and pleased me. She had Marie's memory and my stubbornness, which is a hard combination to argue with across a kitchen table. She thought I should fight louder. She did not yet understand that I was fighting in the only way that ever actually wins, which is slowly, on paper, in a place the other side cannot reach with a clipboard or a loud voice or a husband's money. Dad, she's telling people at school that we're squatters, Hannah said one evening, dropping her backpack on the bench by the door hard enough to rattle the coat hooks. Mara Coyle said her mom said we don't even really own this place. She said it in front of like 6 people, at lunch. Mara was Diane's daughter, a year ahead of Hannah, and from what I gathered, she wore her mother's certainty the way some kids wear a letter jacket. I told Hannah that what Diane said at the country club did not change what was recorded at the county. I told her that the deed did not care about rumors, that the deed had never once lost an argument it was actually allowed to be part of. Then I sat down at the table, and I wrote down what Diane had said. The date, the place, the witnesses Hannah named. Because a pattern of public characterization is a pattern, and patterns go in the binder. Hannah stood behind my chair and watched me write it, her arms crossed. "You really think a folder is going to beat her?" she said. It was not quite a question. "I think the folder already beat her," I said. "She just doesn't know it yet." Hannah did not believe me that night. I could see it in her face. Then she pulled out the chair across from me, and she picked up a pen, and she asked me to tell her again exactly what Mara had said so she could get the wording right. That was the first page she ever wrote in the binder. It was not the last. The second year is when it turned from petty to deliberate. That was the summer the fake inspector showed up. A man in a polo shirt and pressed khakis with a laminated badge on a lanyard knocked on my door on a Saturday morning, clipboard under his arm, and said he was with code enforcement and needed to inspect my septic and my outbuildings. He had the bored, official tone of a man who had practiced it. I asked to see his county credentials. He tapped the lanyard badge, which on close inspection said Aspenwood Ridge Compliance Officer, a title that exists in exactly 0 municipal codes anywhere in this country. There is no such job. There is no such authority. It was a badge somebody had ordered off the internet and laminated at the office supply store down on Route 9, 2 doors from the suite Diane rented from me, though I did not think about that part yet. I told him politely that he was standing on private land outside any association, that he had no authority I was obligated to recognize, and that he needed to leave. He started to say something about cooperation and community standards, and I took out my phone and photographed his vehicle and his plate, and he decided cooperation could wait and left. Then I called the actual county code office, gave them my parcel number, and asked whether they had sent anyone or had any open complaint. They confirmed they had sent no one, had no such officer, and had no open file on my parcel. I asked them to email me that confirmation in writing. I logged all of it, the fake badge, the plate number, the county's written confirmation that the man was a fraud, the date and time. That was a new kind of count, a man impersonating a public official on my doorstep, and I underlined it in the binder twice. A week later, the real escalation, the one that taught me what they were really after. Sam called me from the feed store, his voice tight in a way I had not heard from him before. "Walt, there's a survey crew up at the top parcels. Summit Line trucks, 3 of them. They're shooting lines down toward your easement road. They've got stakes and flagging tape all down the corridor." I drove up. Sure enough, a crew with a total station on a tripod was running stakes along the boundary between the undeveloped top parcels and my land. Orange flagging snapping in the wind, and a Summit Line foreman in a hard hat was on the phone pacing the gravel. When he saw my truck, he hung up fast and turned his back. I did not say anything to him. There was nothing to say to a man taking somebody else's orders. I drove home, sat down at my kitchen table, and pulled the development filings, which as a former title examiner, I knew exactly how to find and exactly how to read. The reserve. 22 luxury lots. Projected build-out value. The application itself put in the neighborhood of $9 million. Sole legal access proposed across an easement that did not belong to them and never had. Greg Coyle's signature on the application, firm and confident. Diane Coyle listed as the association liaison, the bridge between the development and the HOA she ran. 2 names on one scheme. That was the night it all clicked into a single clean line, the way a survey closes when every angle finally checks. The fines, the fake inspector, the rumors at the high school, the pressure on a widower and his teenage daughter. None of it was about my fence. None of it had ever been about my fence. It was about my road. They needed my grandfather's easement to make 22 lots buildable. And the cheapest possible way to acquire an easement is to convince the man who holds it over months of grinding pressure that he never really owned anything at all, that he should just sign the cabin over and go. I wrote it down. Then I drove to the county recorder's office, and I did the one thing a title man does that nobody expects. I pulled the deed and the recorded plat for the building on Route 9, the strip mall where Diane's own association rented its office, and I confirmed in writing what I already knew. The holding company Marie and I formed in 2003 held title to that building, free and clear, and the Aspenwood Ridge HOA was a month-to-month commercial tenant in Suite 4. I made certified copies. I put them in the binder, in their own folder, behind a tab I labeled in Marie's blue pen. I did not deploy any of it. Not yet. A clean instrument is patient. It waits for the other side to commit somewhere they cannot retreat from. The third year is when Diane stopped sending letters and started sending people. It was a Tuesday in October, a little after 8 in the morning, when Hannah called me from the cabin while I was down in town picking up feed at Sam's. I had my arm halfway into a grain sack when the phone rang. And I will not smooth out what she said, because she did not say it smoothly. Dad, there's men at the gate. They have bolt cutters, Dad. They cut the chain. I heard it. There's a truck. It says Summit Line. They're driving up the road. They're coming up the drive. What do I do? Where are you? My hands went cold on the grain sack. Sam was already looking at me. I kept my voice as level as I could make it. Because a scared kid does not need a scared parent on the other end of the line. I told her to lock the cabin door, the deadbolt and the chain both. Stay inside, go to the upstairs window and start recording on her phone, and not to go outside for any reason no matter what anyone said to her. I told her I was 11 minutes away, and I was coming right now. Then I told Sam to call it in too, and I called the sheriff's department from the truck while I drove. And I gave them the address and the words trespassing and cut lock and unknown men on a property with a teenager home alone. And I drove that mountain road faster than I have ever driven it, before or since. When I came up my own access road, the gate chain was lying cut in the gravel in 2 bright pieces, and a Summit Line crew truck was parked halfway up my drive. 2 men stood beside survey equipment, driving stakes into my land like they already held the deed to it. Hannah was at the upstairs window with her phone up, filming, her face white behind the glass, but steady. She had done exactly what I asked. A sheriff's deputy's vehicle came up the road behind me 90 seconds later. No siren, just the slow, purposeful climb of a man who has done this before. The deputy's name was Ray Mott. He was maybe 40, calm, careful, the kind of officer who does not raise his voice because he has never once needed to. He got out, took in the cut chain on the ground, the truck, the stakes, the man at the window's father standing in his own drive, and he asked the 2 men what they were doing on the property. The foreman said they had authorization from the Homeowners Association to survey for an easement. Deputy Mott asked evenly to see the authorization. The foreman did not have it on paper. The foreman called Diane. She arrived 11 minutes later in the white SUV, magenta blazer, sunglasses up on her bob, clipboard already in her hand before her heels hit the gravel. And she walked up my driveway like she was inspecting a property she had already closed on. "Officer, this man's parcel is functionally part of our development envelope," she said, loud, pitching her voice for the deputy and not for me. "We have every right to survey the access corridor. He's been obstructing legitimate association business for 2 years. Frankly, I'm glad you're here because he needs to be told." Deputy Mott was unfailingly polite, and he was also immovable, which is a combination I have come to respect more than almost any other. He explained to me, and to her, the thing that constrained him. A complaint had been filed claiming a property right, and he was a deputy, not a judge. And he could not settle a boundary or an easement dispute standing in my driveway, no matter who was shouting. "But," he said, turning to Diane, "nobody enters a posted private property by cutting a lock, property right claimed or not. And that part was not in dispute and was not going to happen on his watch. The survey stopped today." Then he turned to me, and he said the most useful sentence anyone said to me in 3 years. "If you want to end this for good and not just for today, build the documented record, bring the recorded instrument to the county, and let the paper do what no citation of mine can do." He said a recorded instrument would end it faster than anything he could write. Then he cited the foreman for the cut lock, told the crew to load up and leave, and waited, arms folded, until the Summit Line truck was back down the mountain. 3 years. 1 cut lock and 2 bright pieces in my gravel. 2 men driving stakes into my grandfather's land. 1 terrified 18-year-old at a window with a phone, filming because her father asked her to, and trusting that it would matter. I wrote every minute of it down that night while Hannah sat at the table across from me with her own pad. And this time, she did not ask whether the folder would beat them. This time, she helped me number the pages. And her handwriting next to mine is in that binder still. What Diane did not know was that her men cutting that chain had just handed me the public, documented criminal overreach I had been waiting 18 months for them to commit. She had crossed from petty into illegal in front of a sworn deputy, on my daughter's video, on my posted land. The easement she wanted to claim was about to be the thing that buried the reserve. And the office she ran her whole performance out of was rented from me. I spent the next 6 weeks doing what I do, quietly on paper at the kitchen table, while the first snow came and went on the granite above the cabin. I had my surveyor, a retired licensed professional named Carl Ostrander, who had run boundaries in that county for 30 years and forgotten more about local easements than most lawyers ever learn, prepare a fresh certified survey and a recorded affidavit. Carl was a spare, deliberate man who measured twice and spoke once. He came up the mountain, walked the whole easement corridor with me in the cold, found every original corner pin my grandfather's surveyor had set in 1958, and confirmed on the ground what the record said on paper. The access easement across the lower parcel was appurtenant to my land, recorded in 1958, and benefited my parcel exclusively. Not the top parcels, not the reserve, mine and my heirs. Then Carl did the thing that closed the case before it ever opened. He pulled the original 1958 instrument from the county archive, the easement deed my grandfather recorded the same year he hung that iron gate, and we read it together at my table under the good lamp. The language was unambiguous in the way old careful deeds are, written by people who had seen what vague language costs. The easement ran to the Brennan parcel and its heirs and assigns. It granted access to no other land. It could not be stretched, shared, or borrowed by a development uphill, because the men who wrote it in 1958 had closed that door on purpose. Greg Coyle's entire $9 million development depended on a road he had no legal right to use, and the single document proving he had no right to it had been sitting in the county archive, public and recorded and available to anyone with the patience to ask for it, since before Diane Coyle was born. She could have read it any day for 3 years. She never did. Incuriosity is not a small flaw. It is the whole flaw. I also did one more thing, and I will be honest that I took a quiet satisfaction in it that I did not let show on my face. I instructed the property manager for the Route 9 building to send the Aspen Woodridge Homeowners Association a formal notice that their month-to-month commercial lease on Suite 4 would not be renewed, effective in 60 days, signed by the holding company. I did not gloat in the notice. There was nothing in it but 2 flat sentences and a date. A lease ending is a lease ending. Still, I knew that a notice to vacate, unlike a fine or a survey stake, is the one piece of paper a tenant actually reads to the bottom. And I knew that this time, finally, after 3 years, Diane would go and look at who owned the thing she had been standing in while she planned how to take my home. And I knew exactly whose name she would find on the title, in blue ink, next to a second name she did not know to look for. The county scheduled a hearing on the Summit Line development application for a Wednesday morning in December. The reserve needed its access easement approved on the record to move forward. Greg and Diane Coyle both filed to speak in favor. I filed to speak as well, as the holder of the affected easement. I brought the binder. I brought Carl. I brought Hannah, who was 18 now and wanted to see it. The hearing room was a plain county chamber with fluorescent light and folding chairs and a long table where 3 commissioners sat behind little nameplates. Diane was in the front row in a cream blazer this time, more lawyer than HOA queen. Greg beside her in a sport coat with his hands folded, their attorney with a leather folio open to a yellow legal pad. The room held maybe 40 people, some of them Aspenwood Ridge homeowners who had started, I would learn later, to ask quiet questions about where their dues had been going. When the development item came up, Greg spoke first, smooth, about jobs and tax base and the quality and care that the reserve would bring to the mountain. He was good at it. He had clearly done it before. Then Diane spoke second, and she could not help herself. And that was the whole game right there. She told the commissioners that the lone holdout obstructing this fine project was an elderly man whose property was, in her exact words, functionally part of the development corridor, and whose claim to an exclusive easement was, she said, looking briefly at me, frankly questionable. She said it the way she had said everything for 3 years, as though saying it with enough confidence made it recorded fact. That was the 3rd time she had said that word, functionally, in public, in 3 different rooms, across 3 years. My gate, the driveway with Deputy Mott, and now the county chamber. I had all 3 logged, dated, with witnesses named, in a binder sitting closed on the chair beside my daughter. I did not respond to her. I have never believed in responding to a loud voice with a louder one. I waited for my turn. When the chairman called my name, I walked to the small podium, and I did not make a speech. I laid one document flat on the table in front of the clerk, and I asked her to enter it into the record. It was the certified copy of the 1958 recorded easement, Carl's affidavit, and the fresh certified survey stapled behind it. I said exactly 3 sentences, in the plainest voice I had. The proposed access easement to the top parcels does not exist and never has. The only recorded easement on that road runs to my parcel and my heirs, recorded in 1958, 67 years ago. Their development has no legal access, and it never did. Then I stopped talking, and I let the paper do the rest. The room went quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when everyone in it understands at the same moment that something has just changed and cannot change back. The chairman picked up the instrument and read it. Slow, his glasses down his nose. He passed it to the commissioner on his left, who read it and said nothing. He passed it to the commissioner on his right, who read it and looked up at the Coyles. The Coyles' attorney stood and asked, a little too quickly, to see it. The clerk handed it across. I watched his face as he read the date and the granting language and the words heirs and assigns. And I watched him understand, in about 15 seconds, that there was no argument anywhere in that document for him to make. You cannot cross-examine a recorded instrument. You cannot object to it. You can only read it and then read it again, hoping it says something different. And it never does. The chairman looked over his glasses at Greg Coyle and asked him, plainly, whether Summit Line had any other legal access to the top parcels, any other recorded easement, any other road. Greg looked at his attorney. The attorney looked down at the 1958 deed in his hands. Nobody answered, and the silence stretched out long enough that the answer became deafening. Because the answer was no, and every person in that fluorescent room now knew it was no. The development item was tabled, then continued. Then, 3 weeks later, when no access could be produced, withdrawn, and dead. 22 lots the application valued near $9 million, finished in the time it took 3 commissioners to pass 1 sheet of paper down a folding table. There was one more beat, and it is the one I still turn over. As the meeting broke up and people gathered their coats, Diane came toward me, fast, across the front of the room, her face working in a way I had never seen it do. And she said, low and furious, "You think one old paper changes anything? Do you have any idea who I am in this county?" And I did not say I told you so, because in 3 years I had never told her anything at all. I simply reached into my jacket pocket and took out the second document, the one I had carried folded there all morning, and I handed it to her without a word. The recorded deed to the building on Route 9, her association's office, my name on the title, and Marie's beside it, in the county recorder's stamp. She read it standing up in the emptying room under the fluorescent light. I watched her get to the bottom of it. I watched her understand that she had spent 3 years and an unknown amount of her husband's money trying to take a cabin from a man who had been her landlord the entire time. The whole time, every month, she signed a fine in her capacity as president. She had been mailing her own rent to a company he owned and who had 60 days earlier quietly declined to renew her lease. She did not have anything to say to that. There was no line on her clipboard for it. The consequence fell exactly where her own actions pointed it. The way water always finds the grade you built and not the one you wanted. The reserve had no legal access, so the option on the top parcels lapsed and Summit Line forfeited the deposits it had already sunk into a development it could never reach. The county, now looking hard at the whole development file, opened a review that swept up the fake compliance officer and the cut lock. And the citation Deputy Mott had written became part of a record that was no longer just mine, the Aspenwood Ridge Homeowners Association, having lost its office lease on Route 9 and facing pointed questions from its own 90 dues-paying homeowners about why their money had funded a private survey crew cutting a lock on land outside the subdivision, called a special meeting. Diane Coyle resigned the presidency she had held for 9 years before the membership could finish the motion to remove her. She walked out of the only authority she had ever really held, and she walked out of it on her own, which is the only way that kind of authority ever truly ends. The paired numbers, if you want them, and I know some of you do, are simple. Fines she assessed against me over 3 years and successfully collected, $0. Money her husband's development lost when the easement she never once read killed it, roughly $9 million. The deed that decided the whole thing was recorded 67 years before she ever drove up my road and told me my home was functionally hers. A reporter from the regional paper called me for comment. I gave her 1 sentence, and only one. The record was always public, I said, and anyone could have read it, including the people who chose not to. I drove home up my own road that evening, past the gate my grandfather hung in 1958. The cut chain replaced now with a heavier one I had set myself. Hannah was in the kitchen when I came in, the light warm in the windows against the early dark. She had laid the binder on the counter, closed 3 years of it, and set Marie's blue pen on top of it the way you set flowers somewhere. She had made coffee for both of us the way her mother used to, too strong to be polite, and she did not say much, and neither did I, because some things do not need saying once the paper has said them. We sat at the table where I had written down 3 years of one woman's overreach, a single dated line at a time, her handwriting and mine together on the last pages. And the cabin was quiet, and it was ours. And it had never for one recorded second been anything else. Hannah went off to college the next fall to study. Of all the things in the world she could have chosen, property law, she told me she wanted to be the person other people call when somebody tries to take their land with a clipboard and a loud voice, and a confidence that they are too small to fight back. I keep the folder she helped me number on the shelf by the door, where I can put my hand on it without looking. The 1958 easement is in it. The recorded deed to the building on Route 9 is in it. And 3 years of dated notes in 2 different hands are in it. And that last part is the part I would not trade for the cabin itself. So here is the lesson. Plain. Because you stayed this long and you earned it. When someone with a title and a clipboard tells you that your land, your home, your right is functionally theirs, do not argue with them in the driveway. Go to the county recorder's office and pull your own deed. Read it. Walk your boundary against what the paper says. Confirm your easements and your access in writing. If a fine arrives, photograph it and file it and write down the date, even if you owe nothing, especially if you owe nothing, because a pattern you can prove is worth more than any speech you can give. Keep the binder. Label the folder. The loud voice always sounds like authority right up until the moment a recorded instrument is laid on the table, and then it sounds like exactly what it always was, which is noise. If you have ever had someone try to take what was provably yours, tell me about it down below. Because I read every one of them, and so do the people who need to hear they are not crazy and not alone. Subscribe if you want to hear the next one. Because next week, I am going to tell you about a retired water rights engineer whose HOA tried to drain his pond for a golf course, and the 90-year-old decree that turned their bulldozers around at the property line. Until then, pull your deed. Read it. Keep it close.